My racist tenants cut my family's 80-year-old magnolia trees because they didn't match the bride's aesthetic vision. They had to cancel the honeymoon to spend the money on legal fees after I sued them. I inherited this house and surrounding property from my great-grandparents when they passed away. This includes 2 rental properties, which my great-grandfather had been renting out for years to 2 families. Relations between the 3 families had always been cordial, even when my great-grandparents passed a few years ago, and I became the new landlord. However, the dads of both families are only a little younger than my grandfather. I get the impression from our interactions they chafe a little bit that their new landlord is a woman in her late 20s. Still, I figured everything was fine because I've never raised the rent beyond what my great-grandfather set it at, and I always have professionals over to deal with any issues on the homes within 24 hours of receiving a call from them. Like some kind of fairy tale, the kids of the families that rent from me fell in love and have decided to get married. They wanted to have a block party, and the bride's father asked if I'd be okay with them decorating on my property as well since it's part of the block. I admit that I took decorating to mean things like hanging lights or other traditional wedding decorations, so I gave my consent. This morning I woke up to the sound of chainsaws. I went outside to discover the parents of the bride and groom were cutting down my magnolia trees, because they didn't match the bride's aesthetic vision. Each tree is about 80 years old. This house was purchased as a wedding present for my great-grandmother, and they planted magnolias there when they got married. If my great-grandmother had lived, she'd be turning 100 next year. I told them to stop immediately. I didn't give them permission for that, and I was going to call the police. They stopped, but when I went inside to grab my cell they started up again. When I confronted them, I was told that since they're my tenants, I'd just be suing myself, so I could suck it up, buttercup. I admit, I was more than a little intimidated by a group of men with chainsaws. I went back in my house while they continued cutting and called the police, who came out and told them to stop, and gave them tickets, but they started up again once the police were gone. I called the police again, and they haven't come back out yet. I've also already called an arborist friend of mine to come out and do an assessment immediately. I called my insurance company as well, and they're going to have someone call me back. But while I'm waiting, the trees hold a lot of sentimental value to my family and I, so this is very emotionally draining. Update: the day after my post, I called a good friend of mine who has been my go-to plumber since I inherited the property, to ask for his help. He went to both houses the next day, saying that I had called him last week since the water bill seemed high, and asked him to come look at the pipes. He went through the houses, surreptitiously taking pictures, while inspecting the bathroom, kitchens and water boilers for leaks. Apparently, while he was there they made a bunch of comments about me that included racial slurs and such about how I need to learn my place. After he'd inspected both houses he came over to mine, and gave me all the photos. I conferred with an attorney regarding evicting them, and 4 days later both families were served with 7-day eviction notices. As expected, they blew up and started throwing rocks at my house, slinging more racial epithets in my direction. I'd always grown up being terrified of angry racist white men twice my size. I never realized how unbelievably pathetic they actually are, until I watched them crying like babies while being hauled off by the police on the video cameras. The bride made a very angry post on Facebook, followed up by standing up in church during prayers and concerns to beg for prayers for her family, because our landlord is evicting all of us because she's jealous that I'm getting married. The pastor, feigning innocence, said, "I thought she was evicting you all because your father cut down magnolias." The hardest game of you laugh you lose I've ever played. Still proud I survived. According to the arborist, based on the number of trees cut down, the number of trees damaged beyond repair, and how old those trees were, the value of the trees alone is more than I could sell all 3 houses for in the current housing market around here. Then the attorney started talking about how the damages are multiplied and I would be quite happy with half that number. They did, in fact, destroy the houses as best they could. I have enough savings left that I can live without the rent for a while, so I'm using it as an excuse to have both houses renovated, since they haven't had major renovations since well before I was born. The bride and groom got married and had their reception in the church basement instead of the cul-de-sac. They had to cancel the honeymoon to spend the money on legal fees. I've had the stumps removed and I'm planning to have some healthy saplings planted next year, once things are a bit more settled. The renovations are going well, installing some nice new kitchen appliances next week. As far as I've heard, the bride and groom are staying with his grandmother in Pensacola, while the rest of the groom's family has rented out a trailer in another part of the county. The bride's family are staying with the bride's aunt, who's charging them about double in rent what I was.